Welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. My name is Horst Lüning. I'm the senior taster of Whisky.com. This is my son Ben, the master taster of Whisky.com. And today we have a experienced tasting with 3 whiskies. Yesterday we had the beginner's tasting with 4 whiskies, and today we have a little bit more of time to talk about these whiskies. And they are very special ones. They are not the normal ones. They are a little bit more rare, more expensive. One is even cheaper. So we're really mixed, and it's a tasting for people who know already a lot about whiskey.
So if you had the beginner's tasting yesterday, you know a good amount of whiskey now, and now we just go a bit more into advanced, and we see the purple elephant is some people sitting behind that screen who have bought the big tasting kit. We have the big tasting kit here with the big bottles, and in Germany we sold the small tasting kit with small sample bottles. So it's always nice to have these bottles at hand. We don't expect you, maybe you have 1 or 2 of these bottles because they are really popular. And today we're looking at a bit more of the advanced whiskey. So what is advanced whiskeys? Is there the stereotypical advanced whiskeys? Not quite. You can have advanced whiskeys in a lot of directions. We have realized yesterday that you can have whiskies from all around the world. So we're going more into the Scottish advanced direction. So not the special older bourbons or definite strange rye whiskies or that kind of type, but more of the older whiskies. So we're going into a bit older whiskies. What is an old whiskey? So if we talk about an old whiskey, it's 20 years or older. This here is, for example, quite old whiskey. Not the very, very top, but at I would say the 5% oldest whiskies that are out there on the market by volume. And this is the Highland Park 40 years old. Unfortunately, when you have older whiskies, they become a lot more expensive. So how much is the Highland Park 40?
4 digits.
4 digits.
Not just reaching, but deep in.
So when we have older whiskies, there can be very, very old and vintage whiskies. The next one is Mcallen 1950 from Gordon Macphail, and this is, I don't think it is more than it's still 4 digits. I think this is more advanced into the 5 digits probably now. Maybe you can get it at a bargain at 4-digit number, but so this is kind of the top range. I think this year we had the world record with Glenfarclas, 74 years old, bottled by, I don't know who it was, but it was a very, very old whiskey. But these are very, very exceptional ones. So this is kind of what you, without the world records, what you get as the oldest whiskies out there. So older whiskies, let's get back to the table. Are the older whiskies, are they all out of my reach? Can I not pay for any old whiskies because they're all 4-digit bottles? No, they're not. So this bottle here that we have is a 20-year-old Scotch whiskey. I missed out some words there. 20-year-old Scotch whiskies for a price of 34.90 euros, so around $38. So can you have a 20-year-old Scotch for $37? How can that be? Because it's not a single malt. Yesterday we only had single malt whiskies. This is a single grain whiskey, so it's made from barley grain. Well, is it really barley grain?
No, it's wheat grain.
Oh, it's wheat grain.
Typically, it's wheat grain because this has a higher yield in alcohol, and it's cheaper per ton. So this is the ingredient you typically need for a blended whiskey. You need an amount of single malts and then the rest of grain whiskey for a typical blended whiskey. And even if you have a 20-year-old blended whiskey, you have to have a 21-year-old grain. So there are those old grains there residing and maturing in the warehouses. And here the Macduff Distillery decided to bottle that. They do not only have pot stills, but I think they have some column stills as well. And there they're producing around the clock continuously grain whiskey, and that makes it cheaper. If you have a batch production with malt whiskey, then you have to clean the still between each batch, and every batch has to be heated up and cooled down, and the grain just runs through this distillery column. It's heated all the time. You have to clean it once a year, making some repairs, yes, but most of the time it's running, it's cheap. So grain whiskey is produced cheaper, and you need it as well for the blended whiskey industry. And here the distillery decided, well, you're putting it into a bottle and sell it and make some extra money, because you won't get that much money from a blended whiskey producer. So as a single grain, you might get more for it. It's 40% ABV, 20 years of age, and it has a decent amount of sherry cask influence in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, tight cork.
So I have the summer glass. Yes, sherry, and this is definitely not a malt. So they're lacking this malt influence, this cereal influence. The wheat is very neutral in taste. I find a little bit of a grape, winey tone in it, a hint of vanilla, and a little bit of spiciness in the back. Well, I remember we had that just an hour ago, and now my brain remembers that this one had this spicy note in the back.
So now that you told me it's a wheat whiskey, I just feel it a lot different, and it's nice because it's sweet. And it has a good amount of maturity and oak in it, and it has a bit of a nuttiness to it, but also some stuff that is just odd for me. It's just a bit off. It just feels different to the normal single malt that we're used to. And yeah, it's nice, but it's just somehow it's weird.
So in 50 years ago, most of the grain whiskey was produced from corn, maize. So this was cheap then. With the advancement of the wheat production, and the wheat became a lot cheaper, and now even cuts to the price of the corn, of the maize. They switched over to the wheat, and the side effect was you have a higher yield in alcohol. So you get more alcohol out of a ton of wheat than of a ton of maize. Yeah. Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
Very light, easy in the start, 40% ABV, no strength in it, or higher strength in it. But then the oak kicks in, a big amount of oak, with a starting bitterness of really 80% chocolate, of a espresso. No cappuccino, they would be too mild, but an espresso, just full strength. Yeah, the aftertaste quite long, so you feel the cask for 20 years.
So when you have it in your mouth, you do realize, okay, that's sherry cask in it. So there is a bit of a a sweetness going on. But again, it feels different. It feels very round, very smooth, but somehow the sweetness is different. The sweetness comes over differently. And for me, it's always the grain always tastes a bit flat. But what I want to emphasize with that whiskey is you do have very interesting flavors in that whiskey. But the package as a whole is a bit strange, and it's just not a single malt as we're used to. But what you can do with this whiskey is you can put it in a blended whiskey, as it's a blend between grain and single malt whiskey. And when you blend it the right way, it can really give you a very nice whiskies because they can complement each other. If you do it the bad way, then you come out with quirky whiskey, but there are many out there on the market.
And I think this would also go very well in better cocktails, whiskey cocktails, because there's this old oakiness in it, which will come through in those cocktails.
So yeah, we've had a look at I always wanted to do that, have a grain whiskey in the advanced tasting in it, because it's just a different side of the Scotch whiskey. It's not the single malt, it's the single grain. Yeah, because they can be really good, and this is a good example for that. Do you want to do that part with the independent bottlers?
So in the very old days, there had been a very, very lot of small distilleries in the Highlands, across the Highlands. And then when industrialization starts and took off, then there were companies buying together those smaller whiskey distilleries into conglomerates, into bigger companies. And there had been a time where close to none individual distilleries were left over. Everything was owned by the big companies. And then a few guys said, well, we would like to make our own whiskey, our own single malt whiskey, but we do not have a distillery. So they bought casks from the distilleries and bottled them on their own name. And they matured them even longer, waited until the cask had reached the optimum, and then put it into a bottle and put their own name on it, together with the distillery name. And so there developed a lot of independent bottlers, independent from the distilleries. But there are some specialties like the Gordon Macphail independent bottler, now 135, 140 years old. And they were the bottlers for the malt whiskies for those companies officially. So there had been a lot of distilleries for the blend whiskey industry, and the big companies said, well, you're bottling, you're smaller, you're more efficient, you're bottling as single malt. And then there were others coming onto the market, like Signatory Vintage or Douglas Lang, where here you can see Fred Lang in the entrance to the Douglas House, where we had a live tasting and a real tasting, very nice surrounding. And they have several ranges of whiskies from a lot of different distilleries, big warehouses with their own casks of the distilleries. And from time to time, there are independent bottles out on the market without the name of the distillery on it. Why? Well, they haven't paid for that. So if you're paying for using the name, then the casks are really more expensive, because the distillery says, well, we made it, we invested in the name of the company, we did all the advertisement, and now you're bottling as an independent bottler, you have to pay for the name. So this is, I think that's okay. And here you see casks from Glengrant, Linkwood just in the top two, in the bottom Orkney, Highland Park, Aberlour, two of them, and Glenrothes just the lower right. So there's a lot of casks lying in those warehouses, maturing even longer, and they look very, very carefully that they just bottle them to the right time when they are, just to the top of the maturity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, how do you prevent someone from bottling under your name, because you're selling their product and they are now allowed to write on it what is in it, and what you do is you teaspoon it. That is what you call a whiskey. That where you put a little bit of different whiskey in it from a different distillery. You can just go to the supermarket, take a drop and put it in. Won't change the whiskey a bit, but it will make it officially a blended whiskey. And then you're not allowed to write the distillery on it. So that's how you prevent someone from using your name. Also, you can just say it's a teaspoon whiskey. Just don't bother putting it in. It's the same effect. Okay, so the next distillery, the next bottle we're going to look at is not an independent bottler, but an independent distillery.
So this one stayed independent over the years, over the 100 of years. Glenfarclas, and they were never bought by a big company. I think they were offered a lot of money for the distillery, but they didn't give in. So they are in the 6th, 7th generation running that distillery. And you know the names?
It's the Grand family. And there is a tradition with names with the Grand. I think it started off with George or with John, and then had a son called John, and that had a son who had a son called George, and then had a son called John, and George. I think it was 6th generation now. The youngest one now has 2 daughters, but we're not going to talk about them because they are minors and they still have their life in front of them. And maybe they get into the
everybody gets into whiskey.
Everybody gets into whiskey. I'm not sure, but they might do. It's a great distillery.
I had a son with a big career in engineering.
Got into whiskey. It's the Glenfarclas 25 we're going to try. And the Glenfarclas 25 is the exceptional whiskey, because if you have 25-year-old whiskey and it's not a no-name whiskey, it's a real whiskey from a real distillery and not blended or any second name white label whiskey, then this is the lowest price on the market. So why is that? Because Glenfarclas does not believe in cash flow. When you have had economics and business studies, then you have to take loans and they just own the company. I don't think they have much loans to pay off or anything. If there is a recession coming up, they're not shutting down the distillery. They're just going through and saying, it will go up again. And so they're not selling it at a really, really high price. They are selling a high price, 135 or 34.
150.
150 in dollars, probably around there. And so it's still a high price, but it's not a very, very high price. And the good thing with Glenfarclas is they have the patience, and also they have quite a substantial production. So they have the stock. They can leave the stock longer and produce 25 years, no problem. I'm not quite sure. Did they have problems with supply? Little bit, but not as strong as with other distilleries.
So we had our 25th anniversary last year, and they were able to supply us with 8 casks for our anniversary bottling with 25 years as well. So there are a big number of casks, and we're very happy and thankful that they give us those casks. And afterwards we heard, not too many now. So there are big warehouses, but they are not infinity big.
Mm-hmm. So. In the German tasting, we had a question. So why are they so expensive? And when you calculate it through, the cost of the warehouse and the space and the cask, and then you come out that a year costs you less than $1, 50 cents, somewhere around there. 70 cents if you're in a bit of a higher priced area. So that gives you, 12, 14, 15 euros of production going in there. Why is it costs $150?
And there's Mike J, $150, question mark. I have kids to feed, sorry. Well, give them a good education, let them earn a lot of money, and then you're the grandpa
Who
getting
gets
your 25-year-old Glenfarclas, sitting in your armchair, having a good bottle.
and two nice children.
Be patient. The 25-year-old for you might not be even distilled at the distillery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but why is it so expensive? And the answer is opportunity cost and demand and supply. The thing is, they earn a lot of money by doing that, by selling that with that price. But if they sell at lower prices, they would be sold out. So they can't sell at these high prices. And nobody thought that whiskey would rise with that amount of money over the years. So not that many people put that much money into producing whiskey. If they had known that it could sell that much around this time, they would have probably increased production back in the days if they could have afforded.
Not really, because the managers in the big companies, they're a shorter time in the job than the whiskey matures, so they aren't able to get their boni out of the maturation of those whiskey they're putting on. They just are able to getting their money if they're selling a lot out of the warehouses. So unfortunately, you have to have these family-owned businesses that you have this big amount of whiskey available.
Yeah, but at Glenfarclas, the managers don't have that much independence. They have to check out. They have to go to the next office where there's John sitting in there and going like, "You want to sell it? No, we're keeping it." Yeah. So. So it's a high price, but it's a good price, but it's a high price.
Yeah, and this is. I had it just an hour before, and now it's sweeter. Sherry, overwhelming sherry, little sweet nuttiness. So typically nuts are quite sharp. If you have a fresh hazelnut or a walnut, there's a sharp oiliness in your mouth. But here this is a sweeter and milder nuttiness. Fruitiness, not that sticky fig dates, but a little bit fresher than the 25 years suggest, but dark. So darker fruits, but fresher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a really exceptional, nice sherry bomb, and the thing is, it's not a loaded sherry bomb, but a very mature, round, settled sherry bomb with a lot of fruit in it, a lot of complexity in it, and a good amount of oak to balance it. It's a really nice balanced whiskey.
So these sherry cask whiskey is not a first fill sherry cask. Mm-hmm. This is a mixture between first fill, second fill, probably third fill, that you have, well, a balanced whiskey. If you have a first fill, a real first fill, then this would be black dark and very, very intense. If you would have only second or third fill, then it would be very light, not very much of sherry influence, but more oakiness. Mm-hmm. So this is really good balance between first and second fill, and probably a little bit of third fill cask. Mm-hmm.
So there was a question. The question was about why do the premium and the higher priced whiskey bottles have corks if screw-on caps would do the job much better and wouldn't allow the liquid to evaporate? The answer is tradition, heritage, and also prestige, because it's just people like the cork. If you have a bottle like that and you want to store it for a long time, parafilm it. That's a chemical tape. I think we have it around there somewhere. Parafilm it. It makes it airtight. Put it in a dark place that has no UV light, and you can store the whiskey indefinitely. Yeah. So, cheers.
Cheers. not the everyday dram, the every hour dram. This is so wonderful, mouth-watering, juicy, fruity, and now beginning spiciness, showing the oak. A little bit going over to a pepper note, but just vanishing again. Wonderful. Sherry and oak, just really good balanced. A little bit of leather. Yeah.
Wonderfully balanced whiskey. Again, as in the nose, there's a lot of fruitiness going on. But in the taste, the fruitiness is a bit more subtle and a bit more, there's a bit of a freshness going on. I think in the German taste we had a bit of a discussion. Is it eucalyptus? Is it mint? Is it some kind of other herbs? And yeah, there's a bit of a freshness going around. A little bit of a mintiness from my point of view right now. But it's very, very faint, so it's not overwhelming, because I really don't like the mint that much, but it's a faint taste of it. And now the aftertaste is just oakiness and
yeah, there are more questions over there. Is the Glenfarclas 25 unchill filtered? No, it's chill filtered. It has just 43% ABV, so you have to chill filter. And then this was Andre and Ben Dean. What do you prefer, the Glenfarclas 21 or 25, and why? So I prefer the 25 because it has, from my point of view, a bigger sherry influence. If I remember right, the 21-year-old are several years ago that I had that last time. Yeah.
Okay.
Toby Saunders, will you be mailing free samples, and if so, when? No.
No, unfortunately not.
No.
But there was somebody who said, okay, it's far too expensive. Can you show the miniature of it? We have the miniature. So Glenfarclas is also a bit of traditional. Many distilleries quit the samples, and with the Glenfarclas distillery at the bottom here we have still miniatures. They are 0.50 milliliters, they say, and it's the same as the big bottle, but it's just very, very small. Not quite sure how much they cost, but I think it's around 12-15 euros. So you can get a taste of what you get in the big bottle, just to have tried it once.
And Christopher Molloy, the 15-year-old Glenfarclas is quite good. Yes, the 15-year-old very good. The 17-year-old also very good. The 10 and 12-year-old are a little bit young, so you can see that Glenfarclas can also be very hefty and very intense. So these younger whiskies are that way.
Okay. So yeah, that was the Glenfarclas at 25, and now we're getting a bit into a different side of the hobby whiskey, because whiskey is really a hobby if you get more into it. And we've now seen in the beginner's live tasting how to smell a whiskey, how to look at a whiskey, how to taste the whiskey, and how the whiskey is made. And now we're going a bit away from the actually opening a bottle, but there is also a hobby that collecting the whiskey. So you can collect whiskey, as in cards or stamps or I don't know what else. Cars, more expensive though. And you can collect whiskey. So if you want to catch them all, get all the whiskeys in the world, forget it. There are over 100,000 whiskeys out there. If you want to see how many out there, go onto the Whisky.com database. It's not all the whiskeys out there, but it's it has a lot of whiskeys out there. And you will see there are too many whiskeys that you could possibly buy, store, or get. And what you can do is you can buy all the bottles from a whiskey distillery. Let's say you just start at a standard range and then get some special bottlings from that distillery, and that makes a nice collection. For example, here when you get to Glenfarclas, you start, you said, with a 10, 12, 15, and you end up in the end with the Glenfarclas 40. And that is then a very, very expensive bottle. and it will become even more expensive in the future. So that brings us to a different side of collecting, and that you can collect for your own fun, to have it in your room and look at it, and even have some of them open to try them. And the other side is, if that is so expensive, is there actually money to be made? So when you've bought that bottle back in the days, it was quite expensive, hundreds.
Several hundreds, yeah.
Several hundreds. What is it now?
Several thousands.
Several thousands.
So you made a factor of 10.
Made a factor of 10.
So that's quite good, but there are bottles which typically making more than a factor of 10. If you have a bottle, you buy this for 3,000 or 4,000, you have to wait quite a time until it earns 1,000 more. So this will reach only small margins. But if you're buying a bottle for $70, $80 or euros, and then you're getting few hundreds after a few years, then the margin per year is a lot higher. So the medium priced bottles typically have the highest margin under collectors. So they try to get their fingers as soon as special bottles are appearing on the market on them, and then get the arbitrage to sell them immediately for double the price, because it's demand and supply. And when the supply stops, then the demand still keeps ongoing, then prices rise, and then you can make a factor of 2 in a week, or you can store it for longer and then make a factor of 10 or 20.
Yeah.
So this is possible.
So yes, it's kind of a market with speculation. If you use the technique from Horst, then have a negative example for that. There was a new distillery coming out. They brought out their whiskey with 70 euros, and it was quite expensive. And after a while, people wanted to sell that whiskey for the arbitrage, and they realized you couldn't get the price that we're buying it for. So what you can do is, I have also another picture of a bottle. If you want to be more on the safe side, you buy an expensive bottle, like this 25-year Ardbeg. That would be a very, very safe bet, because you know Ardbeg is an established brand. It will be more expensive in the future, and the prices will rise extensively. I think it came out about nearly a year ago.
Yeah.
Nearly a year ago, and it came out with 700. You really got it for 900 to 1,000 then. And now it's about 1,700. So nearly doubled in 1 year. So it's a good deal, and it's very, very safe deal, as in what you have can go into the other direction as well, but if you know what you're doing, you're usually also safe.
Yeah, or if it won't rise in price, then you have a good whiskey.
Yeah.
To savor.
So the thing is, how do you then cash out the money? That is a bit of a problem. You can go onto your internet platform for selling used stuff. I think we all know that platform, and you can sell it there, but then we have fakes out there. So people don't tend to like to buy these bottles at high prices there, because these are fakes. So always keep the receipt. That is a kind of a authenticity when you've bought it somewhere at a store like Whisky.de or other big online shops, and always keep the receipt. That is kind of good for you. But if you get into a bottle like the Ardbeg, you wait a few years and it's now in the 10,000s, then you might also go to an auction. That has a negative side effect. That also costs a lot of money.
15% they typically take.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there is no right way investing whiskey. So we're not that keen on the collecting part, because it just inflates the price of whiskeys with speculation, and that kind of destroys it.
It's twofold. The connoisseurs say this is evil because they reduce the amount of whiskey available, and then a few years later the connoisseurs say, there are still bottles out on the market. Those are from the financial collectors. So it's a two-sided sword. Yeah. Now we're going to the next one.
Yeah.
This
The
is
next one is from Laphroaig. Here you can see Laphroaig. I think we had a picture yesterday already. And it shows you a Southern Islay whiskey distillery. And whereas yesterday we had a no age statement whiskey, which was a bit younger, now we have a 16-year-old. We have a 45 ppm whiskey that has now been aged for 16 years. And let's find out how much of that smoke evaporates.
And it's 48% ABV, and it's around 100 euros. And there had been for years a 10-year-old, the very, very famous 10-year-old, and a 15-year-old, which was a little bit more expensive. And then they run into supply problems, and the 15-year vanished. And then in 2015, when they had their 200th anniversary here, they're 1815, and they brought out the 16-year-old, and this was so well recognized in the community that they said, well, we have it constantly, and here it is. Oh, very tight. Smoke. What I find funny is, not funny, remarkable is that those bottles here, which are a little bit more experienced, show different sizes. Not forms, not sizes. Every bottle contains the typical 0.7 liters. Here we have a green bottle, remembering the old times. Here we have the brown bottle, a bulgy bottle, even older. And then here we have the standard liquor bottle, or kind of standard, not exactly the standard liquor bottle because it's slightly tapered, but the typically with a clear glass. Yeah, so smokiness. Yeah, so this is Laphroaig. This has a lot of smoke, but it has less smoke than yesterday. The quarter cask, which has no age statement, which might be 7, 8, 9 years old. This one is 16 years old. And the phenols, which give these hospital smoke, are not fully oxidized compounds. And with the years, they oxidize even in the bottle, because over the cork, there's some oxygen going in, and the bottle is working against the air. When it's cool, it reduces in size, sucks the air in, and when it's getting warm, it presses it out. So there's something going on in the bottle as well as before in the casks, and therefore the compounds oxidize. So there is some more complex aroma coming from the casks, and if you have smoky whiskey, it might reduce in smokiness over the years if you do not fix this parafilm against the bottle so that it make work against the air. So we have a super chat, Romain Lavoie, 20, what's that, Canadian dollars?
Yep.
Thank you very much. You're amazing.
So it's sweet, it's smoky, it still has a lot of smoke in it, and it's a bit of it has that nice marine touch to it. I always love that about Laphroaig. It has really that medicinal smoky touch to it, and that these marine flavors that remind you of salt, and combined with a nice sweetness. But sweetness here is very subtle. Also has a bit of a spiciness and maturity to it. So it's a well-rounded one. I do love it. It's really nice. Bourbon cask matured only, so it's really the pure spirit of Laphroaig.
So there are herbs with a light spicy note on it, and heather might be in. You need quite a time until you're used to the smoke, and after getting used to the smoke, then you find the aromas below that. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
Mm-hmm. Now, very sweet, astonishingly sweet. I had that 1 hour ago. Then, following a peppery, probably just chili note in it, reducing very fast to a spicy aftertaste, and it's very long. The smoke is cladding your mouth, and there's this medicinal and a little bit of these rotten seagrass on the shore. So this is very complex in the aftertaste, and the older a smoky whiskey becomes, the more these phenols oxidize to more complex aromas, which you all find in this one.
Mm. Mm. I love it. Now it has a lot of smoke in it. Let's just give it away at the beginning. It's a very smoky whiskey, but it has that medicinal smokiness to it, that marine flavors, a little bit of a herby touch to it as well. And I think it doesn't come that much from the sea salt and that kind of stuff coming in. I think it comes a lot from the peat that they use. And the peat, they have their own peat bog, and only Laphroaig's cutting the peat there, and that just gives that flavor to the Laphroaig whiskey. Obviously, there's a lot more to the Laphroaig whiskey than just the peat, but it's a big part of Laphroaig.
Yeah. Purple Elephant. Should we add some water? Well, as you like. It's 48%, so it has some reserve in it. The Laphroaig 10-year-old with 40% in Europe, and as I read there, 43% in the US. This is even a strong whiskey as well, so there will be some reserve in it that you can dilute it with a little bit, but not too much.
Mm-hmm. That was a question for me. Ben, can you comment briefly on the Laphroaig Distillery? Very nice distillery. Unfortunately, it's a lot to tell. If you'd like to know more about the distillery, there is a distillery video on the channel where I go through the distillery, everything, all the production, and I have a whiskey distillery tasting with the distillery manager that used to work there. I think he quit this year. And we go through all the standard range, and it's just a deep dive into Laphroaig. Very nice distillery, southern coast of Islay, and I can always recommend if you go to Islay.
And one of the very few distilleries which still have malting floors, and lying on the coast, very picturesque. And the still house is one of my favorites because the sills are standing all in a line, looking to the sea. So it's wonderful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we've already have the questionnaire coming up. Which one was your favorite whiskey? If you had it in your glass, don't think that all the 27 people had it in their glass, but yeah, you can vote anyway. So what was my favorite? What was my I'm going with pure quality, not price related to quality. So we definitely have the third place with $35, $37. That's the Greign. Which one was the first? Today I like Laphroaig more. Just, I don't know. And then there is the Glenfarclas. They have really had a race to the top. But today Laphroaig was more for me.
Glenfarclas first, second Laphroaig, and this one was a little bit too oaky for me. The grain was okay, but the long maturity in the cask.
If you put it into a relation of what you pay for it, then it would be a much more difficult decision to make, because it's just that whiskey is nearly a quarter of the Glenfarclas and nearly a third of the Laphroaig. So yeah, very nice. Okay, we have 34 votes today. That's also quite good. And but I think it will be the same as in German. Let's see. Let's close the polls and let's find out which whiskey was the best. Wait Let's go. Thanks to both gentlemen. Okay. Yeah, and we have a clear winner with the Glenfarclas 25 years with 56%, then the Laphroaig 16 with 29%, and the Greign 20 years with 13%. Oh, the Greign with 13%. Really, you're into the Greign whiskey that much? It's just maybe people see that as the one that they can afford. And if you want an old whiskey and you're really on budget, then the Greign is not that bad. I think there's also a 37-year-old Greign whiskey.
And that.
I've had that on the cask here.
Oh,
and it's, or was it the 20? I'm not quite sure, but the
20,
Greign
I had the 20.
is not that bad. It's really not a bad whiskey for a really a good price. But it's not perfect. Don't expect perfection there. Mm-hmm. So let me do a little bit of advertisement for the next live tasting. We're gonna have a live tasting of Ardbeg. We've tried to get that a lot of times already, but with Ardbeg it's a problem because we're not allowed to bottle miniatures because they just don't want that, the company that makes the Ardbeg. So only to have the big bottles, that would really get the German customers really at a disadvantage because not many people will have these. But there is now a present piece with 3 0.2 bottles out there on the market, and we're gonna use that to have a good range of Ardbeg whiskies on our next live tasting. It will be on the 28th of January 2022 at 8 p.m. on Whisky.com/live, Central European Standard Time. If you want to know when it's in your time zone, then just over the next week or so, go to Whisky.com/live, click on that new video event, click on it, and you will find out when it will be sent in your time.
Yeah, and we will say which bottles will be tasted so that you're able to look for them in your market, and probably you get this present set in your country as well.
I think it's the 5-year, the Wee Beastie, the 10, and the Corey Bracken. Not quite sure about the Corey Bracken. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So good. How do we have any other questions? There's a question about Loch Lomond tasting, and best wishes. I think Christmas is over, so Happy New Year.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Very good.
Good. So that was it.
A little faster today.
Yeah. So that was it. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up. There will be a news review coming up tomorrow, so don't miss that. Anything else? Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.